Hello and welcome to Help Nobody Told Me. I am Shannon Johnson, a realtor here in the greater Chicago area, with my partner and co-host today, Jasmine Shapiro.
Hello.
And we have one of our preferred attorneys, Matthew Howarth, with us today. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we're so glad he is here. We trust him to the utmost with our clients, with our family, and he has done multiple transactions for us. He's a very popular man in our area when it comes to residential real estate. So tell us why residential real estate, Matthew?
That's a great question. Thank you for the kind introduction, by the way. I've always been drawn to real estate. I think maybe growing up in the HGTV generation, where you're sitting at home watching House Hunters or Love It or List It, whatever the case may be.
That's why I love real estate, yep.
We all do, you know, it's great entertainment, and it's always just in the periphery, but, you know, as you get older, you start to think about investments and tangible assets and all these things that you don't learn about in school. To be honest, though, from a legal standpoint, I kind of backed into it. My career started in the courtroom. I was a litigation attorney, doing personal injury, ambulance chasers, as they're sometimes talked about maybe behind their backs. The thought was I would be helping people, helping injured parties. For one reason or another, I kind of changed course and found real estate, sort of backed into it actually, but found something where I was really helping people. You know, helping people transact, buy and sell houses, properties, make changes in their lives, hopefully for the better. And I was just drawn to all of those aspects of it. So I really found a home in an area of practice that I enjoy and thrive in.
And what you do is so important because for most Americans, this is the biggest transaction of their life, buying a home. It's the American dream. It's all of that. So you need someone who can guide you legally through that process. It's a lot. And here in the state of Illinois, we use attorneys in most of the state to buy and sell real estate. I just sold my parents' house in Oklahoma. There were no attorneys involved.
Right.
So that we love it as realtors.
We do.
And we lean on you a lot.
And the other thing I think that you have a gift is you explain things to clients, to us, in a way that we can understand it. And we're not going to pretend we know the law, and we defer to you. You've been very, very kind to us. We bothered you on the weekends, on a Saturday night recently, and you have been so kind and got back to us, and we try not to do that to you. We try to respect your time, but not every real estate attorney will do that. So I think that's how you are different.
Well, I appreciate that, and I do think that's the value proposition. Again, I mean, helping people, everyone gets into something because they think they're going to help people, but they also have their ulterior motive. I do feel that, you know, as you said, not every state uses attorneys, and a lot of people enter this attorney-client relationship thinking, do I really need an attorney? Is the attorney going to get in the way? Are they going to make this more complicated? And myself and my team, we strive to address that concern head on and sort of dispel it and say, look, we're not here to make this about ourselves. We're not here to make this some knockdown, drag out, protracted negotiation. We're here to give you information. We're here to guide you. We're here to be a second set of eyes for you. I tell folks all the time, I ultimately don't care what you decide. I just care that you're making a more informed decision. And so again, I think that's what we're bringing to the table for our clients as well as for our agents that we work with, because it should be collaborative and cooperative. That's really the goal.
Right. And it's also really important to have a real estate attorney. So many of our clients say, yeah, I have an attorney. But when we interact with a buyer or seller that has a regular attorney that is not super familiar with the real estate contract, it becomes so much more complicated.
We've all had those situations. You know, it's funny, as I mentioned, when I first started practicing, I was a litigator. I was in the courtroom making arguments, zealously advocating, as we called it in law school, you know, really petitioning for our clients. When I first started doing real estate, I had that same tone. Every letter was confrontational, adversarial, aggressive, and it was, you know, a knockdown, drag-out negotiation. My boss at the time said, look, you know, essentially, you get more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. We all want the same thing. The seller wants to sell their home. The buyer wants to buy. So I changed my tone and adapted that more collaborative, cooperative approach. when you have someone that is not accustomed to that approach, that is a litigator, God bless them, they're used to one tone, one type, one approach. It's hard to change gears.
Right.
And, much like the medical field where everything is very specialized, it does make sense to get someone that this is their specialty. Gone are the days of the general practitioner that can write your will and help you buy your house and sue the guy that rear-ended you all at the same time.
Right.
So I do think, having a real estate attorney is valuable.
And I love that you're humble enough to tell that story, that you had to learn how to communicate in this field. It was different than what you had done in the past. So great learning experience. And I will tell you, I'll toot his horn for him.
So will I.
He has been traveling a bit over the last little weeks, months, because here within our local real estate organizations, we have put out a new real estate contract. We went from the 7.0 to the 8.0. And so there's some changes in that. And you've been out teaching that to some of your brokerages that you work with often, and I'm sure other places as well. And I know I sat through one of his classes, and that was my third 8.0 class that I've been through. And it was very well informed, very well conducted, and very knowledgeable. So he knows what he's talking about. He does the research, and he can produce that sort of result. So we appreciate that immensely.
And this new contract came out of a settlement that happened and went into effect on August 17th. And that's nationwide. It's not just here in Illinois. So for our listeners who are listening from all over, everyone's affected. Here in Illinois, it became state law in January, correct?
That's correct.
That you have to have a buyer's agreement with any client to show them real estate property, whether it is to buy or to rent.
That's correct, yes.
So that is a state law now.
And that was the purpose, or I guess the impetus rather, for this new contract was to memorialize that. The contract that we use in our area is a form residential real estate contract. At the meetings we discussed the reasons for that: uniformity, clarity, something that realtors in the Chicagoland area can point to and have familiarity with. But the impetus for this new version of this contract that we've had for over 20 years now was to memorialize the buyer-broker compensation piece of that settlement. Yes, a nationwide settlement affects every single realtor and real estate transaction. In Illinois, buyers, before they go out and look with an agent, now need to have some sort of contract, some sort of an agreement as to how that agent will be compensated for their services, which is a change from how we did things for 20 or 30 years ago. It's really turned the industry on its head a bit. Like anyone, we don't love change, but I do think the contract, and more importantly, the agents have done a great job of adapting to this change and carrying on business as usual.
So that was going to be my question to you. Have you seen any crazy stuff? Because I know we have.
The other thing that happened with this settlement was the decoupling of commissions.
Yeah.
A big piece of that was they really wanted to see the buyer's agent get paid over here and the seller's agent get paid over here, and for that not to be, here's a number and we as the brokerage are going to pay both agents.
Correct.
So that was a big piece of that, which is why commission is now addressed in the new contract.
Correct. And
It's negotiable.
well, I guess maybe to back up a little bit, 30 some odd years ago, the situation that we had was that you would have a seller and they would have a listing agent that would market the property and sell to any prospective buyer. The buyer was unrepresented really in this entire process. And again, we're going back over 3 decades, long before I even thought about law school, let alone real
So
estate.
that means that no one was looking out for that buyer's best interests.
Well, the buyer would have an agent on paper, but really they were the cooperating agent
Okay.
of the seller. So the seller, in theory, had two
was a
agents.
sub-agent, right?
Correct. It was a sub-agent, is what they called it. So 30 some odd years ago, they changed the way things were done and designated that it was buyer's and seller's agent. But I think these are sort of distinctions without a difference, because ultimately, the selling agent, the listing agent, is listing the property, marketing it. The buying agent, also called the selling agent, is telling their buyer why they need to buy this home. They're selling them on the home. And I guess the thought was that the buyer originally didn't have any representation when this selling agent was just a sub-agent also working on behalf of the deal, nothing really changed. I mean, the buyer's agent and the seller's agent, the listing agent, whatever you want to call them, they're all working on behalf of the deal.
Right.
At the same time, anyone that's representing a buyer is also always working on behalf of their client and working on behalf of themselves and their reputation. They don't want to force someone into a home that's not right for them. So I think this distinction is, again, a distinction without a difference. The problem is now it's forcing buyers to compensate a buyer's broker for their services, which, don't get me wrong, buyer's brokers certainly deserve to be compensated for the hours they spend in the car, the dozens of homes they show. It just creates more struggles for the buyer because that cost is really baked into the sales price of the home. I'm going the long way of saying this settlement, I don't love it for the industry. I think it unnecessarily changed things, but my feelings on it are irrelevant.
Yeah.
We're
Right.
faced with it. We have to address it.
Embrace it and move forward,
And we
right?
move forward. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So how have you seen, I don't know how many transactions you've done post the settlement. How have you seen the change in who is paying the buyer's agent? Because what we're seeing as agents is that generally speaking, the agent is still asking the seller to pay the buyer's agent commission. What are you seeing?
I would say 97% of the deals I've done since August 17th, 2024 have been business as usual. The
Yeah.
seller is still compensating the buyer's broker because, again, that cost is assumed to be baked into the value of the home. You know, it's not like we got to August 17th and all of a sudden the homes are worth 2.5% less because
Right.
now the seller is not paying the buyer's broker.
Right.
On a long enough time horizon, that may change, but for now, I'm happy to report that we're kind of respecting the process and sellers are still compensating buyer's brokers.
And every listing appointment that we've had, Shannon, most of the sellers are like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And some have heard about it, some haven't. But they're like, well, isn't it just, this is how it's supposed to be? And we always say, well, it's your decision, it's negotiable. We are just informing you about it. And whatever your instructions are, what we need to do. But they just feel like it's business as usual.
Which is how it should be. And again, if you're giving them the information, here's a change, here's how we used to do things, here's the options you now have at your disposal, and here's what we're seeing in the marketplace. Ultimately, we are guides more than advocates. We're here to inform, we're here to discuss, and we're here to be a resource, and ultimately let the client make the best decision possible for them.
Right. All right.
So, the settlement, it is what it is.
It is what it is. Let's
It is
move
what it
on
is.
past that.
So, why is it important for buyers and sellers both to have an attorney in a real estate transaction? What is your importance? We've kind of touched on that.
You know, I explain it to clients for two reasons. Number one, I think we've touched on. We're here to provide a sense of comfort and stability, guidance, assurance, a resource. You know, I often describe myself as a disinterested third party, mostly to buyers, but to both parties. I ultimately don't care what the result is, so much as I care that you're making a more informed decision for yourselves and your family. I think there's value in that.
Right.
And it's not even something that's, you know, we're giving legal advice, right? But it's more so just person-to-person advice. But the legal reason I think that we are involved most predominantly is the transfer of legal ownership. And this is the distinction between Illinois and a lot of other states. Only about half the states in the union use attorneys for their real estate transactions. As you pointed out, Illinois technically does not require that you use an attorney, but Cook County and the 5 collar counties, Lake, McHenry, DuPage, Kane, will typically all use attorneys. Outside of that region, it's optional.
It's the wild, wild west.
It's the wild, wild west. But what we're doing is we are doing an analysis of the legal chain of title, as we call it, the history of property ownership, to make sure that our buyer is not taking ownership subject to any liabilities, an unpaid tax lien, a contractor lien, a prior mortgage. You know, I often say I want to make sure you're buying a home that you can sell in the future, because that's good for our business, but most importantly, good for the client who doesn't plan to die in that house.
Right.
So that's, I think, an important value that we're providing that we try to flesh out for our clients and help them appreciate and understand.
Okay.
What are some common red flags in real estate contracts that buyers and sellers should watch out for, that they need to know about?
I think the contingencies in the contract define what type of deal we have, and understanding and appreciating how those contingencies function can create some hurdles. If you have a bad real estate deal, it's often because one party or the other doesn't understand the agreement and doesn't understand those contingencies.
Explain what the contingencies
Certainly.
are for the
Could be.
listeners, or they could be.
A contingency is essentially just a condition that needs to be met in order to complete the transaction.
So it could be like if a buyer puts an offer on a house, but he has to sell their home before they can complete the transaction, right?
Correct. Or you have to get a loan from a bank.
Right.
I agree to buy your home only if I get a loan from a bank that meets certain terms.
Okay.
There's an attorney review and inspection contingency for the attorney to evaluate and review the contract with you, and more importantly, if you're a buyer, to conduct your due diligence, bring in a home inspector or any other inspector that you might want to bring in. Again, understanding the interplay of each of these contingencies, and I could list several of them, and they're
Right.
going to vary
But
from
these are
state
some
to
examples.
state. Correct.
Right.
Understanding how those work in the context of the individual that you're dealing with on the other side, as well as the market for this property, those are all things that we should strive to advise our clients on. And just understand the pitfalls, the things that can go wrong, but the things that will hopefully go right if we have our ducks in a row.
Right.
And again, if our goal is to not only advise, but make this transition, this life change for people more smooth and seamless, I think the more expectations we can set, or the more we can educate, really helps accomplish that goal.
Right. And I know the three of us are all firm believers on buyers getting a home inspection, whether they want to use that as a contingency in the sale or just for personal knowledge. It's very important that our buyers know what they're getting into. Would you not agree?
Absolutely. I think information is key. And
Right.
that's sort of a common theme here, right?
Right.
Provide information to make more
Right.
informed decisions. I should maybe put that on my business card. But the point being, you buyer need to gather the information that's important to you, and that's going to be different for every buyer. You could be dealing with someone that's been relocated 7 different times,
True.
and they know what the process is. They're planning on being here for 3 to 5 years. They know what to look for. They should still get a home inspection because there could be latent defects that can't be seen by the naked eye.
Right.
First-time buyers have no idea what they're doing. Certainly get a home inspection, just to anchor the process a little bit, to help provide more information on the tangible asset on the home that you're going to be living in. What are the problems I might have here? What can I anticipate?
What does my to-do list look like
What is
for
my
the
honey,
next
my honeydew
Right.
list?
1,
Right.
3, 5, 20 years?
Exactly, exactly.
And we did have an inspector on our podcast a couple of weeks ago, and they kind of put the inspection report in like red, yellow, green type of thing, where red are things that might be health and safety issues, and then yellow, green. Yellow is like, okay, this is working fine, but just budget for it. You might have to replace a hot water heater or an air conditioner down the road. So not everything is terrible, but I think you also work really well with the clients to explain that to them. Like, this is not a deal breaker.
Well, and I think, first of all, the inspectors,
For most people, this is not a deal breaker.
subjective.
And this is why.
it
Right.
depends on the person, but I think,
Right.
First of all, the home inspectors, God bless them, they have the most difficult job
Right.
because people
Especially in
are
the winter.
sometimes making $1 million plus decisions
Yeah.
based on their opinion.
Right.
And it is impossible for them to identify every issue. I always warn clients of the drawbacks of the inspection process. They can't go back peeling back walls. They can't go back in time to see what might have happened. They do the best they can with the limitations they have. And then it's our job to synthesize that with the clients and tell them, based on our experience and what we have seen from one inspection to the next, how common is this type of issue and what might it cost to address. Because if it is a major health safety defect, as we like to say, something that's going to cost you in the tens of thousands of dollars, that's something that you might want to address before you move forward with the deal. Now, if it's something that to a first-time home buyer may seem very concerning, but we know that in our experience is not something to worry about, we can advise them of that as well. But ultimately, it's the client's decision.
Sure.
They need to every client's different.
Right.
Someone may have a very high threshold for risk and others may have a very low threshold for risk.
Right.
And we have to respect that. But if we're arming them with the tools they need to make the decision, I feel we've done our job.
Right.
Absolutely.
And that's where we come into, we have a team that could, if, they have a concern and they want to dig a little deeper, they can bring a specialist in, like you were saying. It's, the inspector can only do so much. And that's where you're good at as far as extending maybe the attorney review because they need to do various additional
Because
inspections.
5 days goes by really fast, which is what's written into the contract. That's quick.
How many times have we heard from a client, it's all moving so fast?
Yeah.
You have your 5-day period to slow down and take a breath, but this is a fast-paced industry we live in.
Right.
Most deals are 30 to 45-day close on a finance deal, sometimes 2 to 3 weeks for a cash deal. There's a lot that needs to be done in that time to get this thing across the finish line. We can respect and appreciate what they're going through, but also gently move them along and maybe steer them in the right direction while also being as thorough as possible.
Mm-hmm.
The last thing we want is for a client to call us in 6 to 12 months saying, why did you let me buy this house? I've made a major mistake. Fortunately, I don't think I've had any of those calls.
Right.
Right.
None of us would want that phone call.
That's-
We
that's
have not
what-
had it.
Exactly.
But that's because we're doing our due diligence
Knock on
ahead
wood.
of time. Yeah.
We're being thorough, and you mentioned the team aspect of this as well. I always try to distinguish myself from the agent just to earn the trust with the client and say, I don't work for the buyer's or seller's agent, I work for you.
Right.
But recognizing at the same time, you all would not have brought me into the deal if you didn't trust me. We do have a pre-existing relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So let's discuss that and make sure that you're comfortable. Understand how I work in conjunction with Shannon and Jasmine and what I'm bringing to the table versus what they're bringing to the table, and ultimately hoping that you make the best decision for you. I hate to sound like a broken record, but that's what we're trying
Right.
to
And
get towards.
sometimes we've had to step in and work with the other broker
Yeah.
to kind of get to the
Yes,
finish
because
line.
sometimes attorney language is a bit abrupt, and
Or
sometimes
if they're not using a real estate attorney,
either way.
it could get a little crazy.
So, and we never know what other attorney we're working with out there until we get there. So, oftentimes there are little things that agents can kind of chat amongst themselves because we know our clients, and we can kind of push those little buttons and say, "Hey, talk to our clients. They're okay with X, Y, and Z, Matthew." And then he can say, "Great,
But the other attorney might be so stuck on the legal language that they can't move past it.
Well, and sure, and look, every attorney and every agent is going to have a slightly different idea of how they can provide value to their clients. I think the one thing that should be a non-negotiable for agents and attorneys alike is communication. That
Right.
is the best value that can be provided because over-communicating, over-informing is always better than under-informing. And that goes for communication to the client first and foremost, but to your counterpart in the deal, the agent on the other side, the attorney on the other side. Let's keep the lines of communication open. Let's communicate often and efficiently because we do have this condensed timeline.
Yeah.
And if everyone was communicating on every deal, we wouldn't ever have any problems.
Right.
All right, let's talk about some specific paperwork and things that typically go back and forth across the table. What is title insurance?
Title
And why?
insurance.
Why do I need that?
Title insurance is the most important aspect of this. Now, like any insurance policy, you hope you never have to use it. But what title insurance does is it basically insures for a buyer, with an E, insures, that they will have clean legal title in the home and be able to sell that home in the future. Of course, like any insurance policy, there are always exceptions to that coverage. But the way I explain it is it's the only insurance that looks backward in time. Your homeowner's insurance, you have in case in the future there's a storm and you need a new roof. Your auto insurance, in the future you get rear-ended, right? We can go on and on. Title insurance starts on the date of the closing and goes backwards to the beginning of the property. So any legal issue or legal defect that occurred during that period, so long as the attorney and or title company underwrote that properly, will be covered. So you are not buying a home where you have to pay an owner from 20 years ago's mortgage that was never cleared off of title, or an owner from 5 years ago's tax lien because he didn't pay his taxes.
And if for some reason somebody rears their ugly head and tries to pull something like that on a new buyer, they have this insurance and that protects them, right?
Well, to be clear, it would come up when that new buyer goes to sell. So you
Okay.
get this insurance policy at closing and you tuck it away in a drawer. And as we know, most people, an average home stay, I think, is 5 to 7 years. Obviously, sometimes a lot more, sometimes a lot less. But you go to sell in 5 to 7 years, we run another title search. We do our analysis of the history of the property. And if something comes up that didn't come up when you purchased 5 to 7 years ago, you should have that coverage in place.
Okay.
Like any insurance, we hope you never have to use it.
Right.
I'm happy to report I've been a part of maybe 5 title claims in a decade and countless thousands, tens of thousands of deals. So it does not come up very often, but you want to have life insurance just in case.
Right.
You want to have auto insurance just in case. So
Right.
it's the same thing for home insurance, or title insurance rather.
Sure. How can home buyers protect themselves from wire fraud and other real estate scams? I know that we get,
Constant.
we have to send all of our clients a wire fraud information thing about, I will never ask you for money. If someone asks you for money, call me personally and ask me what's going on before you send any links or do anything. Because
Even-
people
yeah.
get into your email, they see real estate stuff going on, and they're really smart out there and they're really sneaky.
But even with this new buyer's agreement, they have to be presented and signed that they were given this wire fraud warning that we will never, ever ask them to wire us money. And if anybody from any of our companies asks them, call us first.
To answer your question, I know I said communication is key, and I want to issue a slight addendum on this wire issue. Communication is key, but let's call it thoughtful communication. We have 2 problems. Obviously, in a digital age, we're communicating a lot via email, and we are over inundated with email, text correspondence, that it's very easy to punch a couple characters into our phone and ship it off. That's what the fraudsters are relying on, is that you're not totally engaged in your communication. So that's number one, is before you're doing anything with your money, take a second to think about it. Secondarily, and along those same lines, we're very distracted by social media, kids' soccer games, appointments, whatever the case may be. And so, again, we're not totally paying attention. I just know I need to get this done. I need to get it done quickly. So take a step back. When I say thoughtful communication, first of all, you really want to look at who you're receiving that correspondence from. The fraudsters do a very good job of imitating legitimate parties when they are not. You also want to really thoughtfully look at the email itself. I can't tell you how many emails I've seen where they've copy-pasted a legitimate title logo to impersonate a title company
Yeah.
in an effort to get account information. But most importantly, I think the easiest rule of thumb when it comes to wire is analog communication. Pick up the phone, call a number that you
Thank you.
trust,
Yeah.
and keep calling those numbers, independently verify that number, go to your own Google machine and look up the number yourself. I just had to do this for my business a couple days ago to initiate a wire. You call the company, hey, can you read your instructions to me? I just want to make sure these are legitimate, because what fraudsters will do is they'll hack in, they'll impersonate another individual, but most importantly, they'll alter the numbers, and you're never the wiser. And when
Yeah.
your money's gone, it's
gone.
48 hours, but it's very hard to get it back.
Yeah.
So just take a beat, pick up the phone, and be thoughtful with your money. Common sense, but
These are big transactions. It's
Yes.
a lot of
Yes.
money. Take your time.
yes.
Okay.
Can we talk a little bit about HOAs, homeowner associations? So anybody who's buying a condo or a townhouse usually has some sort of a homeowners association. And those can get messy. Even just like trying to get the documents or trying to like figure them out.
That was a deep sigh, Matthew.
Look, I'll try to pick my words carefully. I think HOAs provide great value
Right.
to certain people that don't want to deal with maintenance, that want to have something that's turnkey,
Right.
essentially having a professional landlord. They can certainly complicate a real estate transaction for a whole host of reasons. I think, again, educating a buyer specifically on what they're getting themselves into with the homeowners association, what the homeowners association is offering, but more importantly, what the homeowners association is going to require from you as a resident and a unit owner
Right.
in the way of regular monthly assessments, special assessments, restrictions on your use and enjoyment of the property, who might be on the board? How active is the board? How active is the association? Can you count on them when you need a repair done, or is it going to take 6 months? What do their books look like? Is their budget operating at a surplus or a deficit?
Right.
Is there a risk that if they get hit with litigation, they're going to be belly up? There's a lot of complicating factors with an association. Every association is different, but again, due diligence is important. A buyer and a buyer's attorney need to be looking at this and having discussions about it and anticipating these things.
So does it make it more complicated for you doing a closing when there's an HOA involved?
There's a few more steps. There is a statutorily required disclosure in Illinois that an association needs to provide. You're always looking for a paid assessment letter to show that the previous owner is current on their dues, that there are no pending special assessments, things of that nature. The other problem is it's very fractured. The management is very fractured. You'll have an HOA board that makes decisions, but they outsource the document management to a property management company. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. So
management companies change all the time.
They change all the time. Board members change all the time because they're moving out. It complicates a deal. Understanding what you're getting yourself into, understanding the value that it provides, and the convenience or inconvenience, it's all about trade-offs, right? So again, understanding that hopefully before you even go under contract, if not during the review process with the attorney, is super vital.
So another piece that's really important to the transactions is disclosures that are provided by the sellers. That includes radon, lead, and real property disclosures here in the state of Illinois. What do they need to know about that? What are their legal obligations to disclose in those pieces of paper?
Certainly. I should have given the caveat. No legal advice being given here, right? Just an attorney here have to cover myself. I think, again, case by case, you're going to take a different tact. These disclosures came into being, I'm not going to remember the exact year, but the intention behind the real property disclosures specifically was to sort of level the playing field, make it so that a seller couldn't necessarily pull one over on a buyer or conceal a defect, which is to say there's a known issue in the home that has been a reoccurring issue.
Like every time we get over 2 inches of rain, my basement floods.
Correct. The thought is that the seller will tell the buyer about that so that the buyer can consider that in their purchase. Does it impact the value of the home?
And it may have been taken care of. It may have been repaired,
Correct.
But it was there at one point.
And again, case by case.
Right.
First of all, when a seller is completing these, it never hurts to consult with an attorney if you have a concern about something that you may or may not disclose, right? That's the starting point. The attorneys typically don't get involved until after the contract has been executed in our area.
Right.
But the attorneys are always available prior to contracting because we'd rather get out in front of something before it's too late.
Right.
So that's one thing to keep in mind. But it is going to be case specific. I do also think, though, to your point, we shouldn't always rely on these disclosures being 100% honest because most of the time we're not going to know if they were totally accurate until after we are in the home and we own the home. So even though they are intended to level the playing field, yes, we hope that in an honorable and morally upstanding society, people will be totally accurate with what they're disclosing.
Where do you live? I'm sorry.
Fantasyland, apparently. But do your due diligence, buyer. Protect yourself. Take responsibility for what you're getting yourself into. Sort of
if you see water stains in the basement, ask questions.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't trust, verify, I think would be the summary there.
What about, along those lines, if you are the children of the estate and you're selling mom and dad's home, how does that change your obligations in filling out those disclosures?
Well, I believe the disclosure, the first statement asks if you've occupied the home within the last 12 months, because obviously your knowledge base is going to be totally different.
Right.
Oftentimes, if you're buying or selling a home, on behalf of a deceased family member, there's probably some element of probate to that as well, or an estate planning attorney. Possible to consult with them when you're completing those disclosures. What is my legal obligation? They may need to consult with a real estate attorney, but I think the upshot is, as a matter of fact, you're just going to have less knowledge as to what's taken place on that home.
Right.
So you shouldn't expose yourself as a representative of an estate by making representations that may or may not be accurate.
Absolutely. So what's your top piece of legal advice for a first-time home buyer? Number one thing. First thing.
The first thing that comes to mind, trust your attorney. Trust your agents. Trust the people that you've hired. I think there's so much of this where you have to just take a leap of faith. And there's so many different things that you're trying to corral, whether it be lenders or movers or kids' school or whatever the case may be. You need to take that leap of faith and trust the person that you're working with, and then communicate with them. No question is a stupid question. This is an educational process, and the more information you're armed with, the better. But if you have good representatives that you've hired and you're asking questions of them to educate yourself, you're going to have a more positive experience than if you're a detached, disinterested third party. So I guess to revise it, be engaged in the process. I think that's probably a better answer if I had to think about it again.
And would you say that's the same for sellers?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think information is key for both parties.
Yeah.
Sellers obviously have a totally different directive. Their goal is to just make as much money as possible. They don't
Right.
really care what happens, but you are creating a legal relationship with another party that will expose you to liability in the future.
But if you're a seller, you might be buying something else too, right?
And that oftentimes really helps because
Right.
I always say with
Motivation.
these things, well, again, as I said at the beginning, this is a collaborative process, right? This is not an adversarial process. So if you have
Right.
someone that's a buyer and a seller, they can appreciate what the other party is going through. And I oftentimes tell folks, put yourself in the shoes of the other party.
Right.
Don't just think about what you're going through, think about what they're going through. That will help us work together to arrive at a deal. Because not only do we want these transactions to go through, we'd like people to walk away feeling positive about it.
Right.
This is the only area
sure
of law
do.
I think that's positive.
Right.
Most of them are not. So hopefully you have a positive experience with your agents and your attorneys.
Right. And I think that's why Shannon and I work so hard to get a really great team together. And you are one of our team players. And we wouldn't advise somebody to use you if we didn't ourselves use you and really trust you. So, I think that's a really big piece of it.
Absolutely. Trusting the people you work with. And that goes for the professionals as well. If there's no trust between the professionals, you mentioned deals where maybe you don't have a real estate attorney, you don't know
Right.
them from Adam. It just makes it a little bit more difficult. It
Right.
makes communication harder. There's more barriers when there's not trust.
Right.
So trust, communicate, engage, and I think you'll have a positive experience in your real estate transaction.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
So we will put all of your contact information in our show notes. Mr. Matthew Howarth, and how to contact him, reach out to him as your real estate attorney, whether you are a realtor or a buyer or seller. And of course, we hope that you will join us again next week on Help Nobody Told Me.